Mr. President, I would like to say a few words about how members of the other side of the aisle are doing something that's just not helping the United States of America right now, and that's just obstructing progress with regard to the new administration. Now, I understand that my party right now is in the majority, and to be honest, I've been someone who thinks that we should spend a lot more time here in the Senate, working in the Senate, getting things done. We have a lot of work to do. But I see that people can get frustrated back home on some of the lack of progress. And some of that we can do by spending more time in this body. Some of the questions that are coming out about why aren't things getting done? It's a good question. Answers can be complicated. But what it mostly boils down to is that a lot of issues in this body, rely on consensus. The rules were carefully constructed so that the minority has a say in the legislative process. Now, for the most part, I believe that's a good thing. As a former president once pointed out, we are not red or blue America, we are the United States of America. But that said, the people did come here. The people did elect us to come here to start getting things done. And implicit in their votes for a new president and a new administration was to be able to put people in the federal government to work. To focus on growing the economy, to focus on rebuilding our military after a 25% cut over the last 8 years. To focus on better jobs and higher wages. And throughout history, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, the minority party has understood this. When a new administration gets elected, they start to put nominees in place, and the Senate takes action. We held hearings, and we have votes to put Senate-confirmed officials in the federal government to work. If you don't like the person, you can ask them tough questions in hearings, and you can vote against them on the floor of the Senate or in committees. But what we're seeing right now is just pure obstruction. Every single nominee is being required the maximum amount of time for each individual nominee before there's even a vote. Now, this is something new. This is something different. In fact, the current minority leader said the following words in 2013, quote, "Who in America doesn't think a president, Democrat or Republican, deserves his or her picks for who should run the federal government? Who should run the agencies? Nobody," he said. Nobody. That was the minority leader in 2013. Wise words then, but apparently he and his members have forgotten these words. Mr. President, I have some facts up here on the board. At this point, 10 months into President Obama's presidency, in 2009, the Senate had allowed more than 318 nominees to be cast by a simple vote. The Senate only asked for a procedure known as cloture 5 times. So, essentially, you had President Obama, he got elected, and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, were working to get his team put in place. And yes, the Republicans were doing that. Certainly, I wasn't here then, but they were voting against some of these nominees. That's fine. But what they were doing is they were letting them come to the floor for a vote. In contrast to what I mentioned about President Obama's first year in office, only 100 of President Trump's nominees have been confirmed through voice vote. That's less than a third than the courtesy given to President Obama 8 years ago at this time. Cloture votes for Trump nominees required for 100 nominees. Remember, I just said 5 for the Obama nominees 8 years ago. 100 for the Trump nominees, and only 63 have been allowed by a simple voice vote. So what does that mean? It means that each vote requires a 2-day waiting period and then another 30 hours of debate. That's what it means. Now, the press won't write about it. My friends in the press sitting up here in the gallery, they won't write about this. The contrast to the Trump treatment by the Senate and the Obama treatment by the Senate is incredibly different. You don't hear a word out of the press on this. And this isn't partisan. This is just hurting the American people. There was an election. Now we need to fill the government with people who can run agencies. And with all due respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, they're not doing it. They're not allowing it. We had a vote on an 8th Circuit judge last week. Had to go through cloture. Essentially spent the whole week on this, 2 days and 30 hours. The judge passed the Senate by 95-1 vote. 95-1 vote. He wasn't controversial at all. So what was the point? The point was simply to delay. To delay. So again, here's the difference. Nominations sent to the Senate, about the same. President Obama had more 8 years ago, but not too many more. 520 versus 443 for President Trump. Confirmed at this time during the Obama administration, 342. Trump, 163. So that's 66% for the Obama nominees 8 years ago and 37% for the Trump nominees. The press won't write about it, but this is a disservice to Americans, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I'll just mention a few. We've had nominees such as the Assistant Secretary of Health in Health and Human Services. Came out of committee several weeks ago and sitting on the floor. The Assistant Secretary of Health. It's not a controversial position for the country, but it's an important position. I bet that person is going to get finally passage from the Senate at some point by big supermajorities. But we're delaying it. We're delaying it. I really would love it if the minority leader would come down, look at the American people, and just say, here's why we're delaying. Here's why we're delaying. Explain it. They love to do this kind of stuff, procedural, dark arts, thinking that people aren't watching. People understand this. The head of a leading Democratic think tank told the press that they intend to hold up and tie up floor time on every single Trump administration nominee. Now, Mr. President, if that happens, if they take the time for every nominee, there's over 1,000 who need Senate confirmation, and they take the entire amount of time that they're allowed with cloture and other votes, that they don't extend the courtesy that was extended to President Obama when he was trying to put his team in place, the Trump administration will never have a team in place. It will literally be 4 years. So, I just hope that A, the press starts writing about this, because the difference here in 8 years is quite remarkable, and yet nobody's talking about it. But B, that the minority leader and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will stop obstructing what every other administration has had in terms of a courtesy, which is if you win the election, whether you didn't like it or not, you work with the other side in the U.S. Senate to get your people in place. Department of Defense officials, Department of Transportation officials, Department of Health officials, environmental protection officials. We got to get the country moving again. And the obstruction, which is unprecedented by the minority leader and unfortunately many of my colleagues on the other side, is only harming the American people, only harming the progress that the vast majority of Americans, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, want. And I'm hopeful that they're finally going to change and start moving forward nominations and letting us vote on them so we have an opportunity to actually get this country moving again. Mr. President, I yield the floor.